Welcome to the Young Writers Blog. I'm your host, Tyler, and I am here to talk to you about writing. Whether you are a reader or writer, an aspiring writer, someone who is doing it for hobby, or you have an assignment due within the next 20 minutes and you're looking for some sort of inspiration, we're here to talk about all things that could come up in the course of writing, whether that be sentence structure, topics such as plot or character development, or maybe even how to talk about current events or sensitive issues. The one thing you'll learn being a writer is that you can never know enough about something. So even though I'm going to talk about a lot of basic and fundamental concepts, getting these right is crucial to anything you try to do. The point of this blog is to talk about, discuss all of the things that I wish I knew when I was first starting to write. We're going to talk about sentence structure, story development, character development, current events, how to write about sensitive issues, anything that you think you might want to learn about and that I feel like I can talk about. But the thing about discussions is that they require, what's the word? Yeah, discussion. And so with this being the first video, there's not a lot I can go on except for what I want to talk about. So we're starting there. And with that, we're starting here. This is a book by Christopher Booker. A book by Booker. How did I just get that? The 7 Basic Plots is exactly what it sounds like. It's an overview of 7 fundamental and universal storytelling structures. It's an answer to the feeling that some of you may have had. Why do some stories seem familiar, even predictable? Why is it sometimes easy to know where a story is going to go, what's going to happen next, and how it's all going to end? Short answer, as writers, everything that we've seen before influences what we decide to put into our stories. Long answer, this book, it's like 600 pages. This book describes 7 basic plot structures. They're familiar story arcs that you would find extremely familiar. When we describe them, you'll probably immediately think of 1 or 2 stories that follows the structure because these are basic plots. They're stories that we've all heard and we've all seen before. It's important to note that not every story can be surmised by these 7 basic plots. It's why they're called basic plots, not universal plots. Now, before we get into it, I want to address that this analysis is by no means perfect. And by this analysis, I mean both this book, which is by no means perfect, and this analysis of this book, which is by no means perfect. For example, this book is problematic in the way that it believes that these 7 basic plots are universal and that every story can be surmised with that, when that's extremely untrue. It shoehorns traditional gender roles into all of its structures because it just feels like doing so. And perhaps worst of all, most of the stories it uses are fairy tales or children's stories, the kind of plots that we explicitly make basic and easy to understand because children are reading them. By comparison, I'm by no means going to give a perfect rendition of all of these plot lines. The best way to get this information would be to read the book yourself, though maybe only the first 200 pages or so, because after that it gets... And so before we get started, I'm going to spend the rest of this episode talking about not what these plots are, but why it's important to learn about them. You see, plot is quite possibly the only thing that every single reader is going to recognize. No matter how critical or relaxed your audience is, they are going to notice your plot. They're going to watch your story unfold, have expectations, and make predictions, and you have to be aware of what those predictions might be, about knowing what you have to show them in order for them to understand, and what you can rely on them inferring based on the fact that they've seen stories like this before. The Lord of the Rings doesn't spend any time explaining how Gandalf's magic worked because it's a fantasy world, there's magic, your audience will just accept the fact that that's a thing that can happen. But plot, the plot of your story, that is something that everyone will notice. Everyone will be critical of it. And so, knowing what your audience will expect, knowing what kind of basic structures they're used to seeing and might actually come to expect will be important whether or not you're actually intending to follow one of the basic plots. Because how people receive the story that you tell will be influenced by everything they've seen before, by everything that they've come to expect and like in storytelling and media. And so understanding these plots and how your particular story will interact with these expectations and assumptions will be integral for making sure that you're saying what you want to say. That being said, the idea that all stories are the same and that there's no original thought is completely untrue. Although this book is related to that concept, it very clearly demonstrates that that's absolutely not the case, because there's so many stories that don't fit neatly into these bubbles, into these very straightforward descriptions of how a story needs to progress. The entirety of the postmodern era kind of proves that. And so going forward, the only important thing to know is that there is no right way to structure a story. There's no proper sequence of events that your plot has to follow. There are, however, conventions, and you do have predecessors, so it's important to know what's out there and what it is you're not following if you choose not to follow it. And not following it is okay, because like everything else, stories are much more interesting when they don't live up to expectations and when they don't follow the rules. And so with that, I say thank you for joining me for this episode, and I look forward to hearing what you have to say. If you like what you saw, give us a like. If you have any questions, put a comment down below. This video is brought to you by the Writers Guild of Alberta, and normally we'd use this part to tell you what's going on, but with the calendar year coming to a close, there's not a lot going on. So have a happy holiday, and we'll see you again in the new year. Ooh, look at the hand grow. Depth of field, all up in here. What and what?